and the sun is breaking. It's sunny up here, but not yet down on the coast. Yeah, it looks hot where you are.
Well,
The sun is breaking.
in New York, it's been really hot until I got here.
Oh, you're in New York now. Wow.
Yeah,
It looks hot where you are.
it's very pleasant now.
How come you're in New York?
Well, I'm teaching a workshop on
Oh, you're in New
creativity
York
and
now, wow.
psychology. And that was a couple of days ago, and it went really well. And I haven't been here in maybe 10 years, so it's really wonderful to visit friends and
Great.
see things. Yeah,
Nice.
I'm also having a 50-year reunion of the Godspell cast. So a bunch of us, I was in Godspell, a bunch of us are getting together this weekend.
Oh, that should be fun.
Yeah, it's going to be really fun. So apparently we're streaming.
Yes, we are. And Colleen has arrived. And I am not seeing the chat. I could not see the YouTube chat. I apologize for that.
I see the chat on mine. It is there.
Okay, if you can see the chat, Jerome, then I'll ask you from time to time to read some questions from the YouTube chat so that we can give the YouTube audience a chance to see what's going on.
Great. And Skip, can you monitor the Zoom chat?
I am monitoring the Zoom chat, and I am admitting people. So
Great.
all should be well. We are broadcasting, and so the first thing I want to bring to everyone's attention is that if you are showing yourself on video in the Zoom chat, you are also being broadcast live out on YouTube, and your image will appear on the replay of this session. So if that bothers you in any way, please turn off your video, stop video. You can do that by going up to your upper right hand corner of your screen, or at the bottom of the screen. Also on Zoom, you can stop your video and also mute yourself. During this session, we would appreciate it if everyone would mute themselves. And after Henry talks to us, I'll ask Jerome to read some of the YouTube chat also. And so I want to welcome everyone to our interview with Henry Abramovitch, the author of this new novel. It's very surprising to have a novel coming out from a Jungian to me. So I want to hear all about that. And his book is called Panic Attacks in Pistachio, a psychological detective story. And I'm Skip Conover. I'm the founder of this YouTube channel, and I'm my partner in crime on these Wisdom Path interviews is Tim Holmes. So Tim, do you have something that you want to talk about?
Well, just one thing. I was kind of astonished. I've never quite read anything quite like this, and it was a real surprise and a breath of fresh air to get a Jungian novel. It's just such a treat, because those of us who love that stuff find it hard to find that kind of thing. And also, Henry, your old friend Bob Manus was the fellow that did the workshop with me this last weekend. So he says hello too.
Say hello to him.
All right, good.
So with that, I want to turn over the floor to Henry and have him introduce us to this work, and then we can have an open question and answer question process with both the YouTube audience and the Zoom audience. So if you're in the Zoom audience and you want to ask a question, there's a feature for raising your hand. Please use that so that we see who wants to come up, and I will be calling on people in the order that you raise your hand at the end. And yes, that's all. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, the author of the novel, Henry Abramovitch. Go ahead.
Well, thank you so much, Skip and Tim. It's really a special delight to be with you again, because the rest of you may not know that Skip and Tim and I and Murray Stein have a connection, an amazing connection, because they put a new version of the play that I wrote with Murray Stein, whose 80th birthday is on 2nd of September, and there's a festive event that Chiron is hosting, like a kind of creme de la creme of the Jungian world. And they did this amazing production, really amazing production of the analyst and the rabbi. And maybe I'll just say something, because I think, as I mentioned to Susan Schwartz, I'm interested in friendship now. The friendship between me and Murray is like a fairy tale. I brought him to Israel, and I took him to Masada. And at the top of Masada, we discovered that we were both born in Canada and both went to Yale. And he said, well, what were you doing? And I said, well, I was really involved in drama. I had an ensemble for 4 years in my college. And he turned to me with a big finger and he says, you are the man. And he said, I'm writing a play about the encounter between Rabbi Leo Beck and Carl Jung, and I need somebody who would understand what a rabbi would say. And we just, have been together since. We have three plays now in production, a podcast, My Lunch with Thomas, that you can see on YouTube or Spotify. We have a very new play, Eranos, which is a way of continuation that involves Leo Beck, but also Aniela Yaffe, Olga Kapitan, Erich Neumann. It's a very different kind of play, but very interesting. And I can't say we can't stop. We just keep going. We have 2 more, en route. So it's just a delight to be here and have a chance to talk. Before I start, I want to do an act of imagination with you. Just for those of you, most of you probably know what this is, but just to explain, to contrast it with like a guided imagery. In a guided imagery, if I were doing guided imagery, I would tell you what to imagine. Like imagine you're on the seashore, imagine you're walking along the sea, imagine you meet a dragon, and so forth. Carl Jung really discovered, or I would say reinvented, the active imagination, because it creates a scene and then encourages you to, through your imagination, to continue a scene wherever it will take you. So I'm going to do active imagination. I don't think we'll have time for people to share unless they want to, but I think it will help set a tone. Okay. So imagine you're feeling extremely distressed, highly distressed, agitated, and you're just waiting to get to your therapist. And so you drive to the therapist and you walk in and you go to the door, and instead of seeing the door open, it's shut, and you try to open it and it's locked. And then
we're fine if you are, Henry.
Hmm?
I don't want to interrupt, but I'm sorry. I just wanted to make sure you weren't having a technical problem there.
No, I was giving people time. Some of the people need time to get into this, and so forth.
I'm sorry.
Go on.
Excuse me for.
We'll go on. This, of course, is from the opening of the book. Let me say a little about. I think I had a very unusual childhood in what I now call the Renaissance man complex, which is like if you were a successful lawyer or doctor, that was not good enough. You had to be like a Renaissance man, many, many, many different things, but in a good way. It wasn't like you were a failure if you didn't do it, but we were very much encouraged to, what we would say, like individuation, do what you want to do. And one of the things is of course, to write a novel. I think most adolescents want to write a novel. Certainly in my milieu, everyone did. And some even tried. I never really tried. Poetry was much more my thing. And also drama. When I was at Yale, I was a part of this ensemble. I even wrote a play about the life of Martin Buber that was performed at the Divinity School. And I have a sensibility. I think I understand drama in a way that I don't understand music. And I feel like I should be embarrassed, but I'm not. I really don't like opera. I like classical music very much. I like world music and all music, but I don't like sitting quietly and listening to music. It's not right for me and so forth. So I do that. Now, how did I write this novel? I should say, like many people, I love a good detective story. And in a way, psychology begins with a detective story. Because what is the first detective story, the foundation myth of psychoanalysis? It's a story of Oedipus. Oedipus is the king, and everything is good, but then there's a plague. And he wants to find out what happened. And like a good detective, he interrogates people one by one to find out the truth, that he is both the victim of the plague, but also the perpetrator of the plague. And then he has to deal with the consequences. And I think there is something in psychotherapy and psychoanalysis of like finding out something, following up clues, trying to understand things and so forth, that makes detective stories something very simpatico to the world of psychotherapy, finding out. Of course, everybody's different and so forth. Certainly, this is the way Freud saw it, that there's some hidden wish, there's some hidden problems, and once you find that out, everything will be unlocked. Today we know that's a very simplistic view of what analysis is and so forth. But clearly it's a process, it's understanding. So I like that. I also really love spy novels. Le Carré and the very good ones. There aren't many very good ones. And I think there's something about being a spy that reflects the dynamic that Jung really touched upon when he said, everybody must have a persona. Even a healthy person must have a very clearly defined persona. And that means that any time we're actually a spy, we're like always a double agent. That's the natural human condition, to be revealing and not revealing, finding out and not finding out. Not necessarily is a bad thing, but I think that's part of our fascination with spy novels and what is true and serving things. I mean, I was having a conversation with Skip very poignantly about his family tradition to the military, to the naval, and like holding up the honor of this type of thing and so forth. So there was that. And then it turned out that quite a number of eminent psychologists actually try their hand at writing novels. Not usually very successfully. So how did I write it? First of all, maybe the name. Isn't this a weird name? But I think most of you get it. Panic attacks, okay, it starts and in a way continues with the person in an ongoing panic attack. I have to say I have no special expertise in treating with panic attacks. Obviously, I've touched some patients, but it's not like that's my area of expertise. In Pistachio, pistachios are very important in the Middle East. They begin in the Middle East, and they have a kind of special aura about them, a special mystique about them. As you know, because of the significance of their antiquity, because of how you sit around with close friends or close family and eat a fistu, which is pistachio nuts in Arabic or Hebrew. So there's a special element of this. And I think what I mean by panic attacks in Pistachio, it's like a musical chord, a musical key. Like it could be panic attacks in A minor. In this case, it's in Pistachio. And for those of you who read the novel, you know that there is one of the important mysteries is what's the connection between panic attacks and pistachio. In this case, pistachio ice cream, which is on the cover of the novel. And as a kid, I actually liked pistachio ice cream, though I won't say it was my favorite. How did I write this? I really followed you and said, trust the unconscious. I would sit down, usually late at night, when everything else was done and everyone was sleeping, and I would say, I wonder what's going to happen, and have no idea. And then I would start typing. It's a little like the process of the Inuit shaman sculptors. They're like traveling. In the old days, they're traveling and we'd find a piece of soapstone. It was a very special and malleable stone. And they would like take it with them and they would fold it and put it in their fur coats and things like that for say a few days, even a few weeks. And then suddenly they would be grabbed by the spirit and they would start working. And suddenly I would say, a seal. That was what was inside the soapstone. So it was a little bit like that I would write, and then I would see what was in it, and so forth. And little by little, it ran form. It's not really a novel, it's only a novella. It's short, but it's very, I think, intense. And I think here I do draw on my poetic side, which is the novels that I like, it's like every word counts. It's not like a description. It's like a movie. Every shot should count 200% in this way of this thing. I also, I think when I think about, Tim, the creative process, when you're in the process of creation, you need to be protected by a magical circle that allows you the freedom to explore and unfold, that you're protected not only from outer criticism, but also from your own criticism. And only when you've got to a certain stage can you, as it were, lower that magical protection and then have a critical look at yourself and know who are the right people who you can turn to, who will then give you a critical perspective. In this regard, I like what Oscar Wilde said. He said, good friends stab you in the front, meaning a good friend will tell you exactly what they think, but be very clear and open about it. And sometimes the best criticism that I got from a few selected friends, the people who said, you're trying to do 2 novels, do 1, take this out and so forth. And you don't always listen to the criticism, but it's always good to hear. I also think I'm unusually able to hear criticism, partly because I'm a Jungian analyst and clinical psychologist and anthropologist. So I'm used to having people say terrible things about me and not take it personally. But when I do writing, like the novel, but also even in things, and somebody says, well, this is just terrible, and so forth, I make this sort of feel that, okay, they're criticizing the novel, but the novel is not me, and I kind of make this, I think, a healthy separation between the two to allow to look at. And also, like I think in Inuit Shaman, it's like, what does this novella want to say? Where does it want to go? And I think that's how I got to the end, which I'm not 100% happy with, but like, at the end, he puts the box into the river, and the box is going to go where it's supposed to go. So this is a kind of element of something like that. I also learned a tremendous amount by researching the novel. Something would come out from the unconscious, and I would have no idea what it was, and I have to spend 2 days trying to find out about that. Like Iranian nuclear program. I didn't know anything about it, even though it's very big news here in Israel. I have to do that. And then it's always an interesting question, when is something finished? It's something we talk a lot about in analysis. We talk much less about beginnings, which is something I'm also very interested in. I do workshops with my very close friend, Jan Wiener, beginning and ending. And it's an interesting issue. When is something finished? And how do you know it's finished? And that adding something more will detract from it, on the other hand. So it's a very interesting issue. I tried various different endings, and I think, it leaves it open and so forth. I think Murray wrote it very well. It's like, so it ends with a sort of from panic attack to the beginning of a journey towards something new, to an individuation and so forth. For those who know me, there's a lot of, I make use of a lot of autobiographical elements. I personally always try to open the door at the time of the session, so people don't have to wait behind a closed door or don't even have to knock. So people can come in and know who that is. And so that's playing Batsheva, who's the analyst in the book. She always wants to, and it's a kind of welcoming, and I'm a very welcoming kind of guy. Not, I can do limits, but my heart is to welcome, to accept. But clearly, what happens at the beginning of the novel, without giving too much away, what happens at the beginning of the novel is very much reflected in my own life when I was a young man. And I just come back from a trip, actually my first trip to Israel, and came back and walked into my mother's room and found her dead. And I tried to revive her, and it was unsuccessful. And that certainly set me on a terrible but super important journey towards healing, towards dealing with death in different cultures, towards understanding that certain things have to say. And I think I was also comforted, not only by the Jewish rituals, which I think they're very good at that time, the Shiva and so forth, but also feeling that she had lost her father when she was 4 years old. you know, and I had had her for like 20 years, you know. So even though it was a wrenching thing, but in a way, like a wound can become destiny rather than fate, and that really helped me. At one point, the narrator, who remains unnamed, you know, he doesn't have a name because he's just speaking to himself. You wouldn't call yourself something in this way. He says, I had this crazy friend who was an anthropologist who studies funerals. Well, of course, that's me. I'm an anthropologist of death, and I've buried many people in many different cultures and things like that, and I find it very fascinating and important to be talking about death in a very open sort of way. Maybe I'll stop here, and maybe Tim or Skip, you have some questions, or other people have some questions or things you want me to elaborate on. Maybe I will say one more thing. The one concern I did have is how this might affect my patients. Current patients, past patients, future patients. And it is an issue that we don't really address and so forth. I can tell you that I've had many strange things happen in analysis. But I always was afraid that I would write an article, like a clinical article, and I try almost always to get permission from the patients, and nobody's ever refused me. I mean, there are a lot of issues there, but say, you know, if you ask and say this will help other people, you know, it's usually people feel very honored that you're going to use their material, and those who do, like Susan, you know, this is it's an honoring of the patient in this way. But my anxiety was that somebody would read the paper and feel I was talking about them when I wasn't, and come and attack me. And just now, just a few months ago, it actually happened. I wrote a very lovely paper called "When is it time to stop? When good enough becomes bad enough." And it's an unusual paper because it says, when should the analyst decide to stop analysis, even though the patient wants to continue? And I talk about a lot of interesting things. And I also use the model of Casablanca, where at the end of the movie, if you recall, Rick, which is Humphrey Bogart, says, you asked me to do the thinking for both of you, so I'm going to do the thinking for both of you. So sometimes the analyst has to know it's time to end, even though the patient wants to do it, and that's the best thing for both of you. Sometimes, obviously it's very complicated. So I had one patient come to me and said, you wrote this article about me, you know. You know, anyway, we were able to work it out and so forth in that way. But I also thought, you know, today things are so changed because of YouTube, internet, chat, and so forth. So patients often know more about me than I know about myself. You know, they've researched me, they found out about me, they can do things. So it isn't like you can hide. You know, Jungians were never into this kind of blank screen, which is always a kind of, I think, a sadistic withdrawal. Just if I can put a footnote there, I'm almost sure that Freud introduced that. He says he couldn't stand people looking at him all day, 8 hours a day. And also he was treating mainly these very histrionic women who were like demanding of him and so forth. And so he wanted to have a little distance. And indeed, when you treat people like that, it's good to have a little distance. But for the vast majority of patients, that kind of distance is not good for them. And so forth. And and anyway, I'm just that kind of person. I couldn't be the kind of classical Freudian analysis. And for me, this is the right theory. And I think people have a right to have the theory that suits them, and not the theory that's necessarily absolutely true, because nothing is absolutely true, but that suits me. So that is interesting thing to do. And maybe I'll leave it there. So Skip, Tim?
Boy, there are so many things about this that I find really intriguing. One of them is this idea that the therapist, especially if you work with them a long time, there's a sense in which you know their depth, their wisdom, their compassion, and things like that, but you know nothing about their persona. And so here, the main character is thrust into this position where all of a sudden he's sort of responsible for all of this stuff. And so, like, he goes online and discovers who this person is.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, for most of us, we start out with a persona, and when we're exploring another person, and then we get slowly into those deeper layers. I just thought that was a fascinating revelation of the particular insulation that surrounds that temenos, the relationship between the therapist and the patient.
Yes, I mean, that's part of the detective. I think you're right, Tim. That's part of it. That's really the detective story of like he discovers who she is and who she was. I remember one of my supervisors. I had a patient. It was quite early in my training, and the patient said to me, "You know, how can I trust you? I don't know who you are." And my supervisor, who's this Neumann's disciple, closest disciple, Dvora Kuczynski, she said, "Well, you know, when you're present with somebody, they know you. And if you're present, and that's it, and the details don't matter so much." Also, I'll say something else. I've also written and sadly had experiences through colleagues, analysts or trained analysts who died either suddenly, like in the middle of a session, or had cancer and didn't tell their patients that they were seriously ill. And then they came to the door just like this. And I've written about that. And we don't think enough about what will happen when and if we die or have a serious accident, a serious illness and things like that. In England, by law, all therapists of all sorts, even alternative or expressive therapists, you have to have a list, an updated list of all your patients with contacts, numbers, emails, and so forth, and 2 clinical executors. And that I do mention, that I actually do mention in the book. But in most places, even in Israel, I mean, I try to do it. I don't think anybody else does. And it's particularly terrible. I met just somebody who was a patient of one of these, very close friends of mine, was an analyst. And this is like 35 years ago. And even though she's now an analyst and a fantastic creative person, she said to me very recently, she says, you know, the death of my beloved analyst was the worst thing that ever happened to me.
Yeah, I see Susan has her hand up.
Yeah, I do. Thank you. Henriette, was a great book, an absolute delight to read. And so I just wanted to say that to begin with, as well as to see you. Also, I wondered and was struck by the amount of betrayal. And I wondered, betrayal.
Yeah.
Yes, who the analyst really was.
Yes.
Struck me as betrayal. And I wondered how that it was not really said, but it was so pointed. I wondered why you put that in. It just hung with me. What is that doing there? And so it created another mystique for me and another mystery into the mystery.
Yes, yes. Well, that's very nice. I would say, you know, some people are obsessed with betrayal. They're always concerned with that. I wouldn't say I am, but I think, you know, you, Susan, as a very, you know, talented and analyst, there always is this issue of double loyalties and double agendas. Even when the analyst wants the best for the patient, that could be a double agenda for the patient who doesn't want the best for himself. Or around money. I think most patients go through what we call a normal crisis, a normative crisis, where they say, well, you know, you care about me, don't you, Susan? You care about me. So why don't you treat me for free? You know, so that's another kind of dilemma to do with this sort of thing. So I think that sort of issue about betrayal and working through perhaps the dilemma crisis or the betrayal dilemma is something that analysis provides an opportunity to do.
Yes. That's why I was glad that you put that in, because it is in a way a zinger, which is not usually dealt with and very important. Yes. So thank you.
Yes. Yes. And I think, you know, as Sherlock Holmes says to the narrator, the analyst is the best spy in the world.
Yeah. Another thing that really struck me is the kind of social contrast that you bring up in this situation. And I can't think of anything else that is really parallel to this. But here, this poor guy is just going in for a daily session. And all of a sudden, he's thrown into the kind of lion's den where all of a sudden the veracity of all of these people is front and center and called into question. And he kind of has to deal with it. He's got to figure out who all these people are and what their agenda is and what their hidden agenda is. And I'm just going through my head thinking, how many times in life are we really required to make that determination on that deep a level? It's just amazing.
Well, I want to say that cast of suspects is such a trope, you know, in detective novels, because you have it in this sort of way. And it is a kind of psychological and sociology of who is suspectable, who is worthy of suspect, and who's on your side. And that goes probably to the most primitive feelings that we have, which is like, are we together, or, you know, who's the enemy? Certainly in Israel, we have terrible collective cultural complex about this now, you know, like hatred and things like that. It's so easy to be hatred. Somebody, I think it was American playwright Arthur Miller, he says, the problem with hate is that once you start, it's very hard to stop. So
the problem with what?
The problem with hate is that once you start, it's very hard to stop. I guess you were feeling it in the States too. Yeah. There was something else. Okay, well, let me just say something else about, I think another part of the novel that I really liked is having to choose ice cream when you're a kid. And I'm sure that's something that everyone remembers, this issue of having to choose. And it's like so much of life, it's sort of trivial but transcendent. And I know in my family, I have a brother and a sister, and we're extremely close, even though they live in Brooklyn, but we have regular 2-hour Zoom sessions together. We're extremely close. And we divided, like my theory about siblings and brothers and sisters, which is like, my oldest brother, he ate chocolate. My sister had strawberry. So I had to have vanilla or pistachio.
Interesting. Henry, I want to apologize for interrupting your active imagination.
That's fine, no problem.
I don't know if you want to get back into it.
No. Well, if people want to share about it, I'll be more than happy. But I don't want to put people on the spot. So if people want to share what happened, I'd be delighted to hear. But I think a good novel, it's like, I'll say this. Amos Oz, who was one of Israel's leading novelists, it was translated, an interesting guy. Particularly his best novel is his last one, Tales of Love and Madness, I think. But he was also an excellent literary critic, professor of literature. And he said, and you'll tell me if this works, says the first line of a novel is like a contract between the author and the reader. And you only know if the contract has been fulfilled at the last line.
Okay. Well, your comments rang true on a number of levels, and one of the reasons I've been involved with Jungian psychology for so long is that I was not trained at all. I've never taken a psychology course, but I had been reading Jungian thought, including Man and His Symbols, for maybe 6 years. And so the novel that I wrote just happened to me, and it happened as an act of imagination. I didn't know what that was at the time. I didn't characterize it at the time. But here's the incident that provoked it. At the end of Gulf War I, Norman Schwarzkopf had a war parade in Washington, D.C. He wanted to have a parade in front of the White House. And George H.W. Bush was the president at the time. And I adamant against it because I do not think we should aggrandize the military. I actually cringe every time someone says thank you for your service now, because I find it so insincere. And so instead of watching the war parade, I went for a walk around the U.S. Capitol, and I was between lives, I guess. And I was asking myself, well, what do I want to do with my life? And I decided I wanted to be a writer. And then I said, no, wait a minute, I've always been a writer, but I've always been writing for somebody else. And it would be nice to write for myself. And so I had just heard the author of Jurassic Park, Michael Crichton. I had seen an article of his in the Wall Street Journal where he said, the way you write a novel is to ask a question. And so I was thinking about that, and suddenly a question came to my mind that had bothered me for 30 years at that point. This was in 1993. And the question was, I had gone to Japan when I was 15 years old with my parents. My mother insisted on living on the economy, not on Little America, the base. And so we lived in Kamakura, which was an ancient capital of Japan. And we had a housekeeper, a Japanese housekeeper, who lived in a small room in our house. And one Saturday morning, I said, "Well, Dad, how did Michiko come to us, and why is she living with us, and so on?" And his answer was, well, Japanese farm girls come to Tokyo to earn their dowry, and then they go home. And I don't think I even thought about what his answer was, but that question and his answer cooked in my head for 30 years. And after I finished high school, I went back to Tokyo for 5 years in business. So in total, I lived 8 years in Japan. And so I had a lot of experience with Japanese men, Japanese women, all kinds of experience socially, et cetera, in Japan. And so I said to myself, well, okay, so what is my question, which is, what if a woman like that ultimately becomes the first woman prime minister of Japan? And how would that life be? That was my question. And I started at age 15 with my heroine, whose name is Meiko, by the way. And Meiko, because I speak both Chinese and Japanese, Meiko means beautiful child. So I began to write this novel with what happened to her, or I began to write this novel based on what was going on in her village on this particular morning. And immediately I was overtaken by the story. And literally, I had a vision of Meiko coming to my bedside every morning at 6 a.m. and awakening me. Okay, this 15-year-old Japanese woman in a beautiful kimono. And for the next 8 months, she came to my bedside and awakened me at 6 a.m. And I had no choice. I had to go to my keyboard, turn on my monitor. I turned it down to the lowest possible intensity. And I put my hands on the keyboard. I have no recollection of writing this novel. I remember every event in it as if I had lived it, as if I lived it. And of course, there's a lot of autobiographical stuff, but I literally was overtaken by the novel. And it occurred to me, and I had to write her story from age 15 to age 75, and which was after she had been. It's a story about, in part, about a woman who's writing her memoirs, and I had no idea what had happened to me. It took 8 months. This happened for 8 months, from 6 to 9 in the morning. I had no choice. I had to sit down and write 500 to 1,000 words. To her great credit, my wife refused to read it until I had had 10 other women read it, and which turned out not to be so hard because I worked in an industry of women at the time. But at the end of that 8-month period, when I had completed it and it was done, it was, for me, it was an archetypal thing where I just had no choice. I had to write this novel, and when it was over, the record went back in the jukebox and it was over. But, you know, I put it in the drawer for 16 years. I was embarrassed about some of the shadow items that had come up. And I was still in the middle of my business career, and I didn't know what to do with it. And the thing that saved me was actually the publication of the Red Book, because when I read that, I saw what Dr. Jung meant, and I said, well, wait a minute, if the greatest psychologist of the 20th century had that sort of an experience, then I guess it's okay if I did. And I had 2 unhelpful Freudian analysts read it, and their only comment was, well, it seems like it was a catharsis. And I said, okay, well, maybe it was, but it was far more meaningful than that. And so your story and of how you went through it rings true. And it seemed to me that people who are professional novelists, that's the space they want to get back into if they have writer's block. And they think that they can cheat by taking drugs or getting into alcohol to get into the space. And of course, that never works. And there's plenty of stories of very sad tales of novelists and so on. But I'll just shut up now and let you comment on that.
Well, it's always interesting to hear the story of the story and how it happened and didn't happen. I know a few very eminent Israeli novelists, including David Grossman and Meir Shalev, who just read, and so forth. And they said writing a novel is not like what you say, Skip. It's like working in the bank. You wake up in the morning, you go to the office, and you write, you know, for 30 hours. The extreme of this was George Bernard Shaw. Before he really discovered his métier as a playwright, he was a novelist. And he said every day he had to write 10 pages. And he got so bored with his own work, he would stop in the middle of a sentence. So,
Yeah.
Well, I was seized in my experience, okay, which
yes,
is
well, there is
entirely
that kind
different.
of thing. And there are people exactly like you who like sit down and just write it in 10 days and the whole thing revised and perfect. So, you know, they're different things. I think I mean, in some ways, my type very influenced how I wrote the book, and I think the way the book is. So I'm very strongly intuitive. I always have good ideas. I always am very optimistic, see the good possibilities. My wife, who I love dearly, she's a sensation type, and she anticipates, less good things. So we make a good match, we balance it out in the middle. So I remember, do you remember when you were like in public school, high school or middle school, you had to write essays? Remember that?
Yeah.
So my teachers, if they were like yours, it was so unsuited for me. They said, you want to write an essay, write a detailed outline. And then once you have the detailed outline, write the essay section by section. Well, of course, it was impossible for me to do that. I would write the essay and then write the outline to add at the beginning as a kind of exercise, because it just didn't suit me. And so much education is not oriented to understanding that people learn in different ways. I mean, don't get me on a rant. I'm so anti-education these days, even though I'm a prize teacher, a university professor, and I love to teach. But the goal of teaching is to inspire people. It's not to transmit information or control them and so forth. I think about how many thousands of hours in my life were wasted on exams, both giving them and taking them. How it's uneducational, how it makes you feel, even if you get 100, you don't feel good about yourself. And if you, like the Jewish joke, the Jewish daughter comes home and says, Dad, I got a 99. And what does Dad say? Where's the other mark?
Yeah.
I also want to talk about parking. The idea that parking is an important aspect of analysis, I took from a book I highly recommend you. It also has an unusual name. It's called The Knife and the Butterfly, a Jungian Analysis. And it's by an English woman who, even though her name is Naomi Lloyd, she's like married to an Englishman, Welshman, and lives in London. She's actually a second-generation Holocaust survivor. And rather late in middle life, she becomes severely depressed, acutely suicidal, and gets recommended for analysis. And just to give you a sense of how this account is unlike any other, she really, as it were, like tells it as it is, in a way that I've never seen it done. She comes in, she meets the analyst, and the analyst says, would you like to sit down? And she says, why would I want to sit in such a place of suffering? And then she says, are you a mother? Because I couldn't go to somebody who's not a mother. And she describes in great detail many aspects of analysis, and certainly of the Jungian analysis, because there are very few accounts of Jungian analysis. There's one short one, Looking for Gold, but that's just about a first year. And even in the accounts in the psychoanalytic world, the famous ones, it doesn't really give you a feel of what it's really like. It's very difficult, I think, maybe impossible to describe what analysis is like, because the reality occurs on so many different intersecting levels of things like that. She did something which I never heard done, but as a researcher, I all honor to her. She, towards the end of the analysis, she did tape recorded interviews with her analysts about various stages in the thing, and quotes this at length and things like that. But one she talks about is how painful finding a parking space is. And indeed it is. I know when people come late to my place, which usually has parking, I have a very beautiful office, which I've described in one of my pieces. It sets you off. And as I think in the book, it's not just finding a parking place, it's finding your place in life, your destiny, being a kind of outcast, being like a Cain figure who can't find parking. And parking, it's a very interesting topic, dominates so much of our life, and things like that. So I'm really, I was really inspired by her thing. And I would say this is certainly, if you're interested in getting a sense of what a Jungian analysis, it's true, it's in the English school, so they're, more clear on, less mythological than perhaps in the States, but I would highly recommend it to you.
Interesting. My wife has great parking karma, we say, and she can always find a parking space. And even last night we were celebrating her 70th birthday, and we went into our destination, and there was actually a sign at the front of the parking lot saying parking lot is full. And So I have a handicap placard and I held it up and I said, is there any handicap? They said, oh yeah, there's one right there. And so we had the best parking space right next to the club. And
Well, Skip, I think I actually talk about that in the book because
yeah,
those are people parking blessed. You know, they
Yeah.
always have or Catholics, you know, will have a pray to the saint of parking. and
yes,
And sometimes, you know, it helps because it gives you hope. And that's so much that, you know, it's all, you know, this is again, by that polarity between hope and despair.
all right. So I wanted to ask
I
Jerome.
just want to say one more thing about this.
Oh, sure.
Arthur Koestler, who used to be a very important intellectual figure, you know, he wrote about the place of creation. He wrote a lot of very interesting stuff. He writes in his very interesting autobiography that he was at the time, I think it was in the Spanish Civil War. He was in Spain and he was driving and he couldn't find a parking spot. And so he said, that's it. I'm joining the Communist Party.
Well, people do things for lesser reasons. I wanted to ask Jerome whether if you've been following the YouTube chat, are there any questions there that we should be referring to, Jerome?
No, there's one person that gives some comments, John T. Thackeray. And when you were talking about music, they wrote discord in flat B. So I guess you were describing your favorite music. And so that was a comment. And then the other comment, the raw matters of chaos from which order is defined, irksome, no end. And then subjectivity clowns the best of us. It's a big responsibility to know stuff.
Okay.
So those are the comments. They're not questions or anything like that. But anyway, thanks for your presentation. And I've unfortunately I didn't get the chance to read the book, but I love the play, The Rabbi and the Analyst, and a lot of that, and particularly the thing that struck home was Tikkun Olam, which is the being forgiveness and take action. And I was wondering, how does that play with your attempts at getting people together in terms of to talk about different sins and so forth? I know you're involved in some of the work with between Israel and Pakistan.
I'm glad you asked that, Jerome. Yes, I've been very active for decades in the Israel Interfaith Association, which amazingly has over 50 groups active in Israel and Palestine.
Wow.
And brings people together, you know, rabbis and sheikhs, midwives, kids from villages, you know, binational villages in the Galilee, university students. The group that I've been the co-leader of with a Palestinian friend of mine is an English-speaking group in Jerusalem. And we usually meet at the Finnish Center, which is a beautiful center near the old city, but in a fantastic things. And we have various activities, but I would say one thing we do is like bringing hearts together. We choose a theme, could be forgiveness, could be dreams, could be the festivals, and we share in a kind of open-hearted way of listening. We don't talk about politics because talking about politics is usually just divisive. It raises complexes. Nobody listens and nobody learns from each other. It's not that politics isn't important, but this is something else. And then at other times, I've been involved in something a little more risky, I would say, which is for many years, I was part of a dialogue group. I mean, this is like before Oslo, where groups of people from El Bira, which is like basically a suburb of Ramallah, and Jerusalem, we would meet at each other's homes, often quite, I won't say secretly, but very low profile, especially for the Palestinians, because if they knew, it was known in their community that were meeting with Israelis, their situation would be in danger. But this was an extraordinary opportunity for sharing, for understanding, for humanizing the other, learning about the other, and so forth. Maybe I'll just share one thing. There was this Palestinian guy. He was my age, but he looked about twice as old. He had been in prison for being a member of an organization, nationalist organization. He hadn't actually done anything, but his organization was involved in terrorist acts. And after a couple of years in prison, he just suddenly like had an enlightenment, and he turned to his jailer and he says, "What about the children? Are the children just going to inherit all of this?" And he became somebody, just turned himself around and turned other people around. It's very hard here because I think in Israel and Palestine, there's hundreds of wonderful things from the bottom, I would say, coming from the bottom. But the pressure, like now, it's very much from the top down, and authoritarianism and dictatorship, and you must follow the party line. Another thing that I'm involved with, it doesn't involve the Palestinian side of things, but involved with we have a fantastic organization that helps people who leave the ultra-Orthodox world, which is an extremely closed, sectarian, racist organization, and thousands and thousands of young people want to leave, and they get clothes, they get scholarships, they get places to help, and they get free therapy from very good, therapists like me. And it's a very moving thing. My wife is also involved in this. She's also a psychologist. I would say there are many, many organizations. One of my best friends is very active in Tayush, which is an Israeli, Jewish, Palestinian organization. They go into the West Bank and help protect, say, shepherds who are being tormented by the settlers and the army. So there's lots of hope, but lots of despair. He wrote a beautiful book, which I also recommend to you. It's called Dark Hope by David Schulman.
Colleen has a hand up. Microphone.
Can't hear you.
Colleen, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for this opportunity. I've admired your work, and the play that I was a little involved in was so meaningful because of its timing. And as an artist, I believe that these acts of creativity come from the collective unconscious. And I'm wondering, with that in mind, as I think Jung would describe it, how you feel about your novel. I have two questions about it. One is, in what way do you see the need for your novel at this time, having come from the collective? And then on the other hand, I'm wondering in what way you feel that it has come from your own personal unconscious, that it has personal meaning for you at the same time.
Yes. Well, let me start indirectly. I have a best friend who's a Palestinian writer. He's a very unusual person. He's a lawyer. He's a human rights activist and founded the first and still leading human rights institute in the West Bank. He's also a writer, and he's particularly written prize-winning books about life under the occupation. His name is Raja Shahade, and he also wrote a book about our friendship, which is a very unusual friendship across the lines. His father was a leading member, actually, but very unusually, his family was supportive of a kind of two-state solution, which is very unusual on Palestinian side, and so forth. And I gave him to read the book, and I should say, in the book, which is called Where the Line is Drawn, he writes about, at a certain point, there was a crisis in our friendship, because even though we were very good on a personal level, he felt I wasn't doing enough to fight the injustice of the occupation and the situation. And he probably was right, but I was doing what I could. I was demonstrations and other activities, and he cut off relationships with me, which is again, something I'm fascinated with. And then now it's about sort of almost 20 years ago, 17 years ago, I got sick with lymphoma, and it wasn't clear that I was going to survive. And he said, well, do I want to live with this friend, or do I want to not live with this friend? And so we reunited, and we're still very close friends. I sent him the book, and I got such a compliment from him because he said, Henry, you got the politics right.
That's great.
I didn't write it as a, I mean, I think, I mean, as you know, if you, I think you read the book, Pauline, you know, in the end, who the evildoer is, who the murderer is somebody from my culture, you know, and I think it was an indirect way, it wasn't. But I think you're right very much that, Colleen, that art, you know, I think it's like Shelley said, you know, that art is the natural, poets are the natural legislator of mankind, in the sense that a good work of art, poem, a film, whatever it is, you know, can change people's sensitivity. And Erich Neumann said this very explicitly. He says, we have consciousness evolve, moral consciousness evolves, that become aware of areas where we lack ethical sensitivity. So it's only in a generation that people have been aware of women's rights and women's liberties and freedoms and so forth. I mean, it started a century ago, but people didn't have that. Animal rights. And he was very much a prophet and a precursor of the ecological movement. You know, the earth, the sanctity of the earth, great mother. And he said, without doubt, these things will help us become aware of other areas in which we're morally insensitive and ethically blind. So I would say spy books are based in a way on a kind of politics, intrigue, deceit, betrayal, as Susan Schwartz said, and things like that. You know, I'm happy if it, like, you know, again, in the Jewish tradition, I often said, I don't know what your religious background is, Colleen, but I grew up, you know, I grew up very strongly Jewish, but I had a lot of Catholic friends. And I remember in the Jewish tradition, as soon as you can really speak, you ask questions. You're encouraged to ask questions. At the Seder, the youngest child, asks these 4 questions, and should be more questions. And it's a society of challenging authority, of asking sorts of things. And I had such empathy for my Catholic friends. I said, well, don't you get to ask questions? And they said to me, no, we have to learn the answers off by heart.
Oh dear.
So I wrote it in a way like it because I chose the format of a unnamed narrator who's speaking directly. So it's personal. But clearly the context reverberates, you know, aren't we all spies? Aren't we all complicit? Aren't we all blackmailed? Aren't we all somehow being involved in this? So I'd be happy if it has some sort of greater resonance in that way.
Yeah. Yes,
Well,
yes. Thank you.
Yeah, that's great. If anybody else has,
Yeah, I think
has
this
questions
has a hand up. Lisanne Miller.
Yeah, Lisanne has asked the question here. Can you please repeat the author's name of the book you mentioned, The Knife and the Butterfly?
The Knife, maybe I'll write it in the chat or no. The Knife and the Butterfly by Nomi Lloyd.
Nomi Lloyd.
Nomi Lloyd. Thank you very much.
Is that your only
Melissa.
question?
Hi, I just wanted to say hello.
Hi.
Skip, it's really funny. I must have been in a class with you a very long time ago, and I've been getting, and I can't remember what class it was, but I signed up for your emails. So I always look at them, but I've never joined your group. But when I'm very glad I came today, and thank you so much for talking about your book. And I love Henry. I love pistachio ice cream, so it immediately pay attention. And I love mystery novels, so I really enjoyed this conversation. So thank you so much. And when I Googled The Knife and the Butterfly, I couldn't find the book. So thank you for there's another book with that title, but it's not what you were talking about.
No, it's Nomi Lloyd, and you can or look up. Yes, it's published by Karnak, if I'm not mistaken.
Karnak. Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Or like get my mail from somebody from Skip, and I'll send you the details.
Okay,
Oh, okay.
Thank you, sir.
Great.
Yep.
Yeah.
So can I just ask another question? Are you supposed to be a Jungian professional to come to this group, or is anybody
Absolutely
welcome?
not.
Or
Everybody is welcome. It's
So I
Everybody's
actually want to
welcome.
say, I want to say there is something inherently open about Jungian psychology, which is that you don't have to be an analyst, you could be on a desert island, and if you read Dreams, Memories, Reflections, or Man in Symbols, or whatever, it's open and it speaks and it resonates with your soul. If you like mythology and things
Yeah.
like that.
No,
I
I'm
think that-
very, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Go
whereas
ahead.
like Freudian is like it's very closed, it's very focused, and things like this. So it's like, and this fits very much when I was in graduate school many years ago at Yale. This was like the end of the 60s, and the motto was giving psychology away.
Mm.
So I think, Jungian psychology should be and is accessible. I mean, it's not that analysis has to be in a temenos and all of that, but
Well, I appreciate that. And it reminds me of what you said about you being a welcoming person and keeping your door open for your for your clients. I love that. So thank you very much. Maybe you'll see me again. I enjoyed this so much.
I have to tell a joke. I love to tell jokes. Those people who know me, I'm a relentless joke teller. I hope this works on Zoom. It doesn't always. So this is a very Jewish joke. It's about a Hasidic rabbi who is about to die. And all of his disciples, his Hasidim, are gathered around him for one last spiritual word before he passes to the world of truth. And he sighs and he says, life is like a fountain. Everyone is so inspired and interested. Life is like a fountain. Everyone goes until it comes to the end of the hall, and there's this old woman saying, why? Why is life like a fountain? He said he's the rabbi. So they go back to him and they say, Rabbi, perhaps you can explain why life is like a rabbi? And he sighs and he says, well, life isn't like a rabbi. It isn't like a fountain. So, I mean, there's something very, I would say, very Jewish, and it's universal, but Jewish, and this is like flexibility of thinking. There's no absolute truth. You need to be able to, for instance, when you study the Talmud, one of the basic questions you say, okay, so it's like this and this and this and this. And then somebody says, but what if the opposite is true? And so forth. And it's a kind of dialectical process of understanding.
Yeah.
And the joke, which is sadly very true, just let me do one more, sadly still very true. What happens when you have three Jews together? 7 political parties.
That's great.
7. Well, thank you so much. And one other thing I'll say too, I grew up Catholic, and what you said is very true. You weren't allowed to ask any questions. If you asked questions, that meant you didn't have any faith. And it was totally discouraged. So needless to say, I didn't stick around for very long because I always ask questions. So thank you so much.
Good. Nice to see you.
Henry, you're inspiring me about being a teacher. Because, of course, Socrates never answered a question. He always answered with questions.
That's true.
And,
well, that's an old one. You say, what do the Jews say? What does the Jew answer when you ask why? Why not?
Yeah.
Right on.
Well, the truth about truth is that it's best expressed by paradox. So the things that are true are the things that are the opposite.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
The best we can do is to have both sides.
Yeah.
So the burning question that I wanted to ask, and maybe it's a assertion question, but to see what your reaction is. And maybe I'm just dumb and didn't get it before, but it seems to me that we're always being educated, and we're always being educated by whatever, by novels, by poems, by talking heads on television. Everybody's trying to educate us. And so now I'm starting to see that, the great novelists of all time, including you, do have an educational message in their narratives, and that's something that never really had occurred to me until maybe, I don't know, 5-10 years ago. But I never had a professional to talk to about it, so that's why I picked on you, because it's a surprise seeing a novel come through in the Chiron catalog, for example.
Yeah. Well, there actually are a few others.
Uh-huh.
If you notice, I'm not the first. There are 2 or 3 others in the Chiron catalog alone.
And I probably didn't pay any attention because I didn't know them, but go ahead.
Yeah. Well, let me say, Jung was very inspiring because he says, what does the word education mean and where does it come from? And it comes from Latin, which means to draw out, educere.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea is not to put in, but to draw out. So I think, today, particularly with all this political correctness and polarization that novels and movies or things are like analyzed not in terms of what they say to the person or their aesthetic qualities, but whether they're like reflecting some political line, some idea like that. And I don't like that approach. I'm not saying it's, I think works of art are unique and they can resonate on different levels. I don't think novels have changed the world very much. They do provide, I had a friend of mine, he says his grandson is learning to read. And I said, what a moment. He has a lifetime of pleasure ahead of him. Because there are few things so pleasurable as reading a really good book that does learn. Martin Buber, who's also a favorite of mine, as I think I mentioned, he said, a wonderful book comes my way much more often than a purely wonderful person. But I hope when I die, I won't be reading a book, but have somebody holding my hand. So I don't like this education or educated. It's hierarchical. It says, I have something that you need. I'm an accepting person, but I hate when people are telling me, trying to get me to think a certain way or go a certain way. I don't like that. I think, I think the wonderful thing about, reading a novel, and I hope, which is like, it draws you in. You have a world that you share with the print. And it's like a wonderful, and it's a good book. Like you feel sad when it ends, like where's part 2, right? So that's it. A good thing, I think that, I have this question and you can tell me whether this is, what's the difference between detective story and literature? Literature is worth reading twice. So a good novel, like a good movie, a good poem, it lingers, it stays with you. You think about it, it raises questions. It's like it starts a dialogue, it starts a conversation in this way. It could be about like, where is justice? I mean, if you think of the novel that people say was perhaps the most influential is Uncle Tom's Cabin, because it really got people to experience the personal reality of slavery and inspired people. With my Palestinian friend Raja, I often think that this would make an enormous difference if instead of being strident and calling for justice in a very strident sort of way, if there was a kind of Palestinian Uncle Tom's Cabin, we could open up the hearts of Israelis who don't want to understand and don't want to think about what that is really about. So
well, the reason that we do what we do in our confluence meetings is in part because I don't think you can talk at people. I used to think so. I mean, I was trained as a lawyer and I took an MBA that was 15 courses in statistics by different names. And so here's all these facts, and here's why you have to believe this and that and the other thing. And as I've been doing this work now for 15 years, starting with the website, I was writing many essays, starting with some idea that came out of Jungian thought always, and it just never resonated at all. Okay, and then, but with others. And so I never got any feedback whatsoever. But when I started to connect with artists, people, and I've always connected with artists for at least 40 years, but recently artists who have been involved with Jungian thought, particularly Tim and Colleen, and John Jackson is another. I've seen that it's this Eros side, not the logos side, not talking at people, but just doing things, and amazingly things happen, things change. And so I've sort of given up writing dispositive things, things that explain this or that, but rather doing an art form of some sort that communicates. Because I never have found, you can listen to talking heads all day and maybe you can spout their words, but are they convincing? People tend to watch what they want to watch and what they want to hear. And I don't think they ever change very much because of them. I mean, maybe
I think I would say this, obviously, in some ways, the most powerful experiences are not with words, or making love, or listening to music together, or seeing some fantastic place in nature. But I think, like the novels is that they can point to something that is beyond the word.
Yes.
That's what makes it work. That's a kind of magic.
Yeah. I just have this experience all the time particularly with Tim and Colleen, where, they'll show me a piece of art and I'm just transported into another place where I can't even describe it. I would need to write an encyclopedia to do it, and to say anything dispositive about it. But I know I want more of it, and I know that we're on the right track to moving away from our horrible duality of society right now. And it may take a long time. I don't know how long it will take, but I know that we're on the right track. That's my view. But Tim might want to comment, or Colleen might.
Other questions or comments that people have?
Yeah.
The thing that came that's very big in Jungian psychology, and I'm into Jung as a patient and as a reader, not as a professional, is the opposites.
Yes.
And the duality, and the key, and on the individual level, to start with, on the individual, we have the conscious part and the unconscious. What I'm aware of, and my shadow, and my anima, and my all that, and the society, all my conflicts as a person, with my context, or as a the healing starts when I get in touch with me, with the part of me that I don't, and realize that I have the opposites. That when I'm fighting somebody else, a brother monk or another country or anything, it's a proxy war. I'm fighting my part, the part neglected, which is the shadow of me that's alive in me, that I'm not aware of. I'm fighting it in you, whoever you are, who are a pale image of that. And I'm not aware of all that. And when I start getting in touch with that, I relate much better with the conflicts. The external conflicts start to get solved. It doesn't matter with whom. It could be my family member, or and art does that. and Jungian and that's why Jungian psychology really. I heard that Jung didn't see people until they were in the second half of their life, because in the beginning, in the first part of life, we need things black and white. Who is on my side? Who is against me? Who's the good guy? Who's the bad guy? In the second part of life is when there is no good and bad. I am both. I need to get in touch with anyway, sorry. But it's basically, and a spy actually, or persona, or shadow. I didn't read the novel. I will read it. But a spy is the part of me that's, I'm multiple, I'm not one. I'm aware of part of me. And Jung, Ettinger's talk and article about encounters of the greater personality is essential for me. And he describes that all of us get it to that in the second part of life. And basically it's, we encounter, and he quotes Jung saying that we like to think we're one, but we're made of two personalities, personality number one and personality number two, which is ego and self, which is God, which is unconscious. And we need to get in touch with that. And once we get in touch with that, with me, within me, and art helps us, and literature, a good novel, literature and art, and Jungian psychology helps us do that. But it's experiential, existential. You have to, it's helpful, the knowledge, but but it's really only here. Once you start getting into that, that's when things really happen.
Thank you. Very well said.
Yes. See, I need to push off here, but I just have one more.
Yeah, okay. Well, why don't we come to a good ending? Tim, do you want to say something to bring it to an end?
Well, just on the tail of what Philippe had said, one thing that really that I was aware of reading the book, and I'm sure it's because of having worked on the play and the central idea of the gray zone, is I found myself really contemplating the moral ambiguity that we're often faced with, this kind of gray zone where you need to make a decision, but there are conflicting forces on the outside that are trying to influence you on one way or another, and you have to make a decision. What's right in this particular situation? And I just love being presented with that dilemma, because it's we live in too much of a black and white world, and we are absolved from the human responsibility of having to contend with ambiguity that I think is a sign of real individuation and healthiness. So I thank you for that. That was really a beautiful element of the book.
Well, I do have a concluding thought here, which is that Jungian psychology allows us to see the duality, but it seems to me the job, and maybe Jung didn't say this explicitly enough, is to hold the two snakes and hold them in your life. And of course, I'm going to do a share screen here quickly, because there is art on this, and I just pulled up an example of this snake goddess, but the job of the human being, all of us, is to have the opposites, and there are thousands of them in our lives, the two snakes, but we have to live with that. We have to live holding both of them. And I think that's sort of what Tim was saying, but I wanted to express it in an image here.
And nobody wants that, because it's so painful, so
It's
uncomfortable.
difficult.
We want one snake and then the other is you, and I'm right, and you're the enemy, I'm fine.
That's right.
I
You
must
both need-
comment that that image that you showed, Skip, was on the cover of the first feminist magazine publication.
And she said that, or I'm sorry, say it again what you said, Pauline, about it.
That image that you showed was on the cover of the first feminist magazine publication,
Mhm.
probably 40 years ago.
Yeah, so she understood it, but what we have to do is get all the men to understand it too. That it's not just pulling hard to the left or the right. It's finding a place that we can, as human beings, live with both of them in the world. Right.
Yep. Well, I'm sorry, I've got to push off here, but.
Okay, well, let me
thank you,
just
Henry.
say something. First of all, I was going to say how wonderful this is. Thanks to Skip and Tim, and it's been intimate sharing with you. And I
Thank
just
you,
wanted to
Henry.
one more question, which is how many Jungian analysts does it take to change a light bulb?
I heard another version of that joke.
Go ahead.
Uh,
What is it?
None.
Well, there's two answers. One is none, because they can't find the light bulb. And the other is none, because they have the inner light.
Oh.
Bye-bye, shalom.
Thank you so
Thank
much,
you.
Henry, for being here.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Henry.
And so,
Bye-bye.
all right, so we will call it quits for today. Thank you, Tim. Thanks
Yeah.
everyone for being here.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, Skip.
And it's been great. We do these wisdom path things from time to time. I caught Tim in New York City today, so it was a little hard for him, but we'd like to have people join us, and we are always open-hearted to the extent that we can be. And so please come and join us again. Again, this is a series we've done, I don't know, like 45 of these interviews at this point. And so there is a playlist on the YouTube channel. And I do want to remind people that we are getting together to open our hearts and find answers from the collective in October at Confluence 23. And I'll put the link here in the Zoom chat, just so to remind everyone what it is, so that you can register. We are only allowing 50 people, so it's going to be a very intimate group. And so that is the link, I believe, confluence23.org. Yeah. Okay, so by all means, click on that if you haven't already registered. And in last year, once that the process got started, it became a thing. It's a real thing, and it's something that is about the collective unconscious. It's about the collective in general, and how we can't, we're not going to find any answers through pulling left or right. We have to find a way to pull toward the center, all of us, and to hold the two stakes in one place. So that's the end of my homily. So I'll leave you to it. Thank you very much, Liz-Ann, for your question. I appreciate that. And Susan and Pauline, your comment, I really appreciate that one. It's something we all need on the cover of our magazine, not just women, seems to me. But anyway, okay, peace. Meritz, did you have any question that we didn't get answered? I'm sorry.
No. I just enjoyed listening to him.
Okay, yes, it was very
Philip,
good.
we miss you.
Thank you, Meredith. It's good to see you. Thank
Yeah. So anyway, Peace, thank